So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here, and this is another mechanical video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to replace a rear wheel stud on a 2004 Nissan Exterra. Now keep in mind, I am doing this wheel stud on the rear of this vehicle, which has drum brakes. The front is going to be a little different because it is rotor, and there's a little bit more work involved in that. But this same concept will work for any vehicle that has drum brakes that you are doing a wheel stud on. So let's get to it. So right here, guys, I'm just jacking it up so I can remove the tire and wheel in order to do this stud. A good lifting point for under the rear of this Nissan Exterra is on the differential housing. Now I just went off to the one side since I only had one broken wheel stud. Remove the hubcap just by twisting it 1/8 of a turn or so, and removed the rest of the lug nuts using a 13/16 or a 21mm socket. I also put a jack stand under the differential housing just as an extra safety precaution. It's also a good practice to get into is putting the tire and wheel underneath the vehicle just as an extra safety precaution as well, in case the jack stand or the jack slips. You have that rim under the vehicle that's going to hold it up at least a little bit. Then you should be able to remove the drum by pulling it off of the axle. Then you should just be able to take a hammer and smack the broken wheel stud out from the back of the axle. Now I did end up going to Napa for my wheel studs. However, you can get them on Amazon if you choose. Now before going to install the new wheel stud, you want to match it up against the old one and make sure everything looks the same as far as the knurl, the shoulder, and the threads. One of the critical things to make sure is that from the bottom of the head of the stud to the end of the shoulder is the same length. The reason that I say that's so critical is because if that distance is longer than your old one, your lug nuts will not be able to tighten down all the way and you'll have a loose wheel. To check the threads, you can just put it side by side and make sure they interlock with each other, or just get a wheel nut and thread it onto the new one before installing it. Once verifying you have the correct stud, then all you have to do is go ahead and put it in place. Then you're going to want to get some type of a lubricant, grease, or anti-seize to lubricate the threads on the stud. I actually prefer to use anti-seize for this, but I didn't have any at the time, so I ended up using some brake caliper grease. Then I stacked up a handful of washers on the stud to use as a spacer. Then you're going to take one of your lug nuts. Now you'll notice I actually put this lug nut on in reverse. The taper is actually going out instead of in like it normally would when putting the tire and wheel on. I did this for two reasons. One is it's bigger surface area pushing up against that washer to help pull that stud into position. The other is I didn't want to mess up the taper on my lug nut pulling up against that washer. Now you're going to want to tighten that down with that impact until that stud is firmly pressed against the back of the axle. When I was looking on Amazon, I did see this tool, which I thought was pretty cool, for only 10 bucks. And that has a bearing on it to reduce the amount of friction and heat while you're tightening and pulling that stud down into position. It's also tapered on one side to accommodate your lug nuts in case you can't flip them over to a flat side, so you don't risk damaging the taper. Once you get that wheel stud tightened down and verify that you've pulled it all the way into the axle, all you have to do is put the drum back on. It should slide over pretty easily. Make sure you don't have your parking brake engaged when you go to do this, because that will tighten your shoes against the drum. Once again, just like the stud, make sure your drum is pushed all the way up against the axle. Then go ahead and grab your tire and wheel and put it back on. If you've got some other questionable wheel studs that don't feel the greatest when you're tightening them down, you can use a little bit of anti-seize to lubricate those threads, and that might help extend the life of those other wheel studs. Then go ahead and tighten your lug nuts down in a star pattern. If you are wanting to use a torque wrench to tighten these down, I found the spec online. It was 98 foot-pounds. I always tighten them all down in that initial star pattern and then double check them one more time. Then grab your hubcap, put it in place, and twist it to lock it underneath the lug nuts. While I was searching on Amazon, I also found these lug nuts that will fit this 2004 Nissan Exterra as well, if you need some of those. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible, so I don't waste your time. And I hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.